When it comes to weddings, most of us picture white dresses, flower bouquets, and emotional vows. However, history is brimming with peculiar unions and wedding traditions that are anything but conventional. From royal matchmaking gone awry to quirky cultural customs, these stories are as intriguing as they are hilarious. Before we dive into the bizarre world of historical matrimony, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more fascinating tales that make history come alive. 1. The Roman Emperor, who married a man. Let's kick things off with the Roman Emperor Elagabalus, a ruler who defied societal norms with gusto. In the 3rd century AD, Elagabalus married Heracles, a charioteer, in a ceremony that scandalized Rome. The emperor even insisted on being the bride, complete with a bridal dowry and dress. His critics were furious, not just because of his unconventional marriage, but also because he seemed more focused on love than ruling. Talk about driving ancient Rome off course. Literally. 2. The king who married a corpse. In 14th century Poland, King Casimir III took "till death do us part" a bit too literally. After his wife died, he allegedly held a wedding ceremony to marry her embalmed body. Whether this was true love or an extreme inability to let go is debatable, but it's a story that has left historians scratching their heads for centuries. Imagine the wedding photos: one smiling groom and one eerily silent bride. 3. Foot binding and bridal beauty in ancient China. In ancient China, bridal beauty standards reached torturous heights with the practice of foot binding. Small feet, also known as lotus feet, were considered a status symbol and a key to securing a good marriage. Girls as young as 5 had their feet tightly bound, breaking bones to fit the desired aesthetic. While the weddings themselves were lavish, the bride's silent suffering left an imprint on history. The grooms, likely blissfully unaware of the sacrifices involved in creating those dainty steps down the aisle. 4. The king with 2 weddings, to the same woman. King Henry VIII's love life is legendary, but his father, Henry VII, also had a peculiar marital moment. To secure an alliance with Spain, Henry's son Arthur married Catherine of Aragon. When Arthur died, Henry VII, ever the opportunist, decided that his next son, Henry VIII, should marry Catherine instead. The papal dispensation for this was tricky, leading to 2 weddings for Catherine, one with a sickly teenager and another with a man who later redefined the meaning of marital disputes by founding his own church. 5. Wedding traditions in Viking culture. Viking weddings were as fierce and unique as the Norse people themselves. For starters, the groom's sword often played a starring role in the ceremony. He would present his bride with a sword as a symbol of protection and loyalty. Romantic, if slightly intimidating. The bride, in turn, would braid her hair and wear a dress adorned with family heirlooms. Feast preparations included a boar's head and gallons of mead, ensuring that the wedding party was as rowdy as a modern-day bachelor party. 6. The marriage of dogs in medieval Europe. If you thought pet weddings were a modern invention, think again. In medieval Europe, dogs were occasionally married as part of elaborate political or social ceremonies. Lords and ladies would orchestrate these canine unions to show off their wealth and humor. The dogs were dressed in tiny costumes, complete with a wedding feast of scraps. While Fido and Fifi likely had no idea what was going on, these events drew crowds and laughter. The original viral wedding trend. 7. Japan's elaborate bridal processions. In Edo period Japan, weddings were a grand affair. The bride's family would send her to her new home in a splendid procession featuring servants, gifts, and even musicians. She'd wear multiple layers of kimono, each more intricate than the last. But here's the twist. Some brides practiced a pre-wedding custom of blackening their teeth, ohaguro, to signify maturity. While this might sound odd today, it was considered the height of beauty at the time. Imagine explaining that look to your Instagram followers. 8. The hand-fasting ceremony of the Celts. Before traditional weddings, Celtic couples practiced hand-fasting, a ritual where their hands were tied together to symbolize their union. This ceremony marked a temporary marriage lasting a year and a day. offering the couple a trial period before making a lifelong commitment. It was essentially an early form of a subscription plan, complete with a hands-on cancellation policy. This practice allowed couples to test their compatibility and make an informed decision about their future together. If the arrangement didn't work, they could part ways without lasting obligations, making it a practical approach to relationships in the ancient Celtic tradition. 9. The bizarre dowry requests of Russian princes. In medieval Russia, dowries were far from conventional. Princes often made unusual requests during marriage negotiations. One famously demanded 300 squirrels' pelts as part of his bride's dowry, while another sought barrels of honey and wax. These quirky demands reflected the era's unique blend of practicality and eccentricity, ensuring the groom received items of value for the time. Forget traditional registries. Imagine trying to pack squirrels or honey into a gift box. For medieval princes, these gifts symbolized wealth, status, and a touch of creativity. After all, what more could a royal groom want than squirrels, honey, and marital bliss? 10. Wedding dress rentals in Victorian England. The concept of renting wedding attire might seem modern, but Victorian England was ahead of the curve. Brides who couldn't afford custom-made dresses often rented gowns, jewelry, and even bridesmaids for the day. Yes, you read that right. Bridesmaids were sometimes rented to enhance the grandeur of the event. This tradition begs the question, how close do you really need to be with your wedding party? 11. French royal bedchamber weddings. In medieval France, royal weddings often ended with a public bedchamber ceremony. After exchanging vows, the newlyweds were escorted to their marital bed, under the watchful eyes of the court. Thankfully, the act itself remained private, but witnesses stayed to confirm the marriage was official. This practice wasn't just a formality. It was a political and social statement ensuring the union's legitimacy. If you've ever felt nervous about public speaking on your wedding day, imagine facing an audience for such an intimate moment. It's a reminder that modern weddings, no matter how stressful, could certainly be more awkward. 12. The kidnapped bride tradition in Kyrgyzstan. One of the more controversial customs comes from Kyrgyzstan, where bride kidnapping was practiced for centuries. Young men would abduct their chosen brides, often with their family's help. While some women consented to these staged kidnappings, others did not, making this tradition a hot topic for historians and human rights activists. Thankfully, the practice has largely faded, leaving behind a mix of humor and horror in its historical wake. Conclusion. History proves that love and marriage have never followed a single script. From marrying trees to corpses, kings to charioteers, the peculiarities of matrimony remind us that humans have always been a little bit bonkers when it comes to love. Whether you find these tales inspiring, funny, or downright weird, they certainly prove one thing: there's no such thing as a normal wedding. If you enjoyed these bizarre matrimonial tales, don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Who knows what other wild historical facts we'll uncover next? Let us know in the comments which wedding tradition or story shocked you the most. Hello explorers, the brave souls who venture into the unknown, charting new territories, pushing the limits of human endurance, and, sometimes, hilariously messing up along the way. History might hail them as heroes, but let's not forget their more human moments. After all, even the most seasoned adventurers can have their facepalm days. Before we dive in, don't forget to subscribe for more tales that bring history to life in the most unexpected ways. 1. Christopher Columbus, the guy who couldn't find India. Let's start with the king of geographical blunders himself, Christopher Columbus. Columbus set out to find a new trade route to India, but ended up stumbling upon the Americas instead. Now, discovering a whole new continent might sound impressive, but imagine insisting to your dying day that it's still India. Columbus was so adamant he'd reached Asia that he called the locals Indians, a term that stuck for centuries. It's like ordering pizza, getting sushi instead, and refusing to believe it isn't a margarita. 2. Vasco da Gama. Spicy route, bitter detours. Vasco da Gama's mission was simple: find a sea route to India. And he did. after an 11,000-mile detour around Africa. Along the way, he mistook Madagascar for a land rich with spices and precious gems. When the locals offered bananas instead, Vasco was reportedly so disappointed he almost abandoned the mission. Imagine risking scurvy, storms, and sea monsters, only to discover what you've been craving is a banana smoothie. 3. Marco Polo, the ultimate exaggerator. Marco Polo's travels inspired countless adventurers, but let's not overlook his penchant for creative storytelling. Marco claimed he saw unicorns in what is now Indonesia. Spoiler alert, they were rhinos. He described them as ugly brutes with scaly skin, and none of the charm of a mythical unicorn. You've got to wonder how many people signed up for dangerous expeditions expecting magical creatures and ended up with grumpy horned tanks. 4. Robert Falcon Scott, a freezer full of bad decisions. Poor Robert Falcon Scott, the guy who led an expedition to the South Pole but came second to Roald Amundsen. Scott's list of mistakes reads like an Arctic survival guide of what not to do. He brought Siberian ponies instead of dogs. Spoiler, ponies aren't great in freezing conditions, packed canned food with faulty seals, and underestimated the brutality of Antarctic weather. It's like training for a marathon in flip-flops and eating nothing but potato chips for energy. 5. Sir John Franklin, the original Arctic horror story. Sir John Franklin's search for the Northwest Passage ended in disaster when his ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, got trapped in ice. But let's talk about his choice of supplies. 8,000 tins of poorly sealed canned goods that likely caused lead poisoning. Imagine trying to survive the Arctic while hallucinating from lead exposure. Franklin's crew ended up resorting to, let's just say, extreme culinary measures. History remembers Franklin as a cautionary tale in overpacking the wrong things. 6. Percy Fawcett, lost in the Amazon. Forever. Percy Fawcett was obsessed with finding the legendary city of Z, a supposed lost civilization in the Amazon. Armed with vague maps and a whole lot of optimism, he vanished into the jungle in 1925. His mistake? Bringing his son and a friend on an expedition that had all the planning of a last-minute camping trip. To this day, no one knows exactly what happened to them. Lesson learned: if the map looks like a toddler's drawing, maybe don't trust it. 7. Hernán Cortés, lost in translation. When Hernán Cortés arrived in Mexico, he burned his ships to motivate his men to conquer the Aztec Empire. Bold move, right? Except he didn't account for the massive communication barriers. Cortez's interpreter, La Malinche, was good, but misunderstandings were inevitable. One misstep could have turned a greeting into a declaration of war. Cortés gambled his entire career on vibes and Google Translate, 16th century edition. 8. Henry Hudson. Who needs a backup plan? Henry Hudson's obsession with finding a shortcut to Asia ended with him being set adrift by his own crew in Hudson Bay. Why? Because he was so stubborn about continuing his doomed search that his men mutinied. Being left to float aimlessly in freezing waters is a harsh way to learn that flexibility is a virtue. Fun fact, Hudson's Bay was named after him, as if history said, "Here lies Henry, he tried." 9. Magellan, the shortcut that wasn't. Ferdinand Magellan, the man credited with leading the first circumnavigation of the globe, wasn't exactly a GPS expert. His mission? To find a quick way to the Spice Islands. Instead, he spent 38 days battling the unpredictable and freezing waters of what is now the Strait of Magellan. When they finally made it through, half the crew probably wished they'd just stayed home. It's the 16th century equivalent of choosing a shortcut that adds hours to your road trip. 10. Lewis and Clark. Grizzly bears are not friendly. Meriwether. Lewis and William Clark's famous expedition across the American West had its share of missteps, but none as terrifying as their encounters with grizzly bears. Despite being warned by Native Americans about the bears' ferocity, they approached these massive creatures with, let's say, unearned confidence. The result? a series of chaotic chases that left the explorers scrambling for their lives. Lesson learned: don't poke the bear. Literally. 11. David Livingstone, lost in Africa, found by H.M. Stanley. David Livingstone, the famous Scottish missionary and explorer, had a knack for getting lost in the African wilderness. After years of exploring, he vanished into the interior, and for a while, no one knew what happened to him. Enter Henry Morton Stanley, the journalist sent to find him, with the famous greeting, "Dr. Livingstone, I presume?" Livingstone had been wandering for so long that when Stanley found him, the explorer reportedly had a new appreciation for civilization. Some of his companions perhaps preferred being lost. 12. Sir Richard Francis Burton, the misstep in Mecca. Sir Richard Francis Burton was a renowned British explorer and linguist, known for his daring expeditions in Africa and Asia. One of his more humorous mistakes came during his pilgrimage to Mecca in 1853, where he attempted to secretly enter the holy city while disguised as a Muslim pilgrim. The problem? Burton, a man of many talents, didn't realize the importance of blending in with the local customs, especially when it came to his hygiene. Despite his failure to remain undetected, his exploration efforts were still groundbreaking. Conclusion: explorers may be remembered for their bravery, but their mistakes remind us they were as flawed as anyone else. These blunders turned them into legends and gave us plenty of laughs along the way. So, whether you're planning your next big adventure or just trying to find your car keys, take comfort in knowing that even history's greats had their moments of epic confusion. And hey, don't forget to subscribe for more hilarious dives into the past.